Hey, Kaites ekaso ututu oma inakwana erne isiero aijesan esarachi yene olodudu yabadi saubona noleyi erowuro wola odudu mifon ibolachi uyuko uma inkaro dumelang efonyama awe. Those are many of the 3,700 languages, unique languages to Africa, apart from the tens of thousands of different dialects that we have prevalent in this continent, which I just greeted you with. A very good afternoon to all of you that will watch and may watch later on. I appreciate it. The subject of my discussion today, and it's been kind of floating around on social media, is entitled "How Come the Distribution of KhoeSan Genetics are Found All Over the World? How is it possible?" And that's what I want to speak to about today. And I think it's a bit of a spoiler for the simple reason that I'm busy in pre-production and writing a movie, a documentary entitled KhoeSan, the story of us all, or story of all of us, sorry, which should be produced and done and ready within the next 3 to 4 months. Over the last 10 months, I've been busy writing a book. And the more I'm writing, the more information I'm getting, and the more understanding I'm getting. And I'm already projected well over 1,200 pages. And my concern is this, and this is the motivation for me doing a movie, is because there's just so much information, particularly about the origination of human beings, the origination of African, the origination of KhoeSan people, that is probably going to be over 1,200 pages. And what concerns me is our peoples, whether we do it purposefully or otherwise, just don't read. We just don't read. I post numerous stuff, and the level of, and I say this with respect, the level of understanding and ignorance is quite severe. So that's why I want to do a movie. I think it will affect more people quicker and put it across in a very dynamic manner, and people will be able to understand it far better in a form of movie, and the book will follow that. Just in terms of, I'll give an example. If you take Emil Janssen, who goes around doing Heal the Hood projects at numerous schools, so-called colored schools in the Western Cape, he reaches 1,000 kids at a time. He does the Cape Flats Film Festival, and that reaches thousands and thousands of youngsters. And similarly, I believe using that kind of model to reach as much of the youngsters as possible, to give them knowledge of self and who they are and the history, the factual history, I think it'll be awesome. So what I want to deal with quickly is a couple of for people to understand the genesis of so-called colored people. And I think this is what is critical, and sadly lacking in our community in terms of the exact facts, because there's so much misunderstanding is quite scary. And there's lots, even from what I would regard as pretty intelligent people. In any event, between the this is how it all began. You know that genetics and the study of genetics is a relatively new business. It merely and it's been sped up and developed more because if you understand that the human genome has got 20,000 genes, and in this 20,000 genes, Tony, hello, it needs to be mapped, and the mapping really only started in the late early 80s, and the reason behind that was that computer programs, Charmaine, hello, my darling. The computer programs was just not available. I'll give you an example. In 1981, the size of a 3.5 megabyte hard drive was as big as a room. Was 3 meters long and 2 meters wide. It was a huge thing. That was 3.5 megabyte. In fact, a 100 megabyte hard drive in 1985 would cost you 30,000 US dollars. So it's been programming hardware and combination of hardware and software, which has allowed people. Lionel, how are you, my brother? It's allowed scientists, particularly geneticists, to be able to calculate complex, complex, complex issues around genetics. So, in 1985, a group of American geneticists, headed by Rebecca Cann, Mark Stoneking, and Alan Wilson. They were of the Department of Biochemistry in UCLA. And in 1987, they published a groundbreaking scientific paper referred to as Mitochondrial DNA and the Human Evolution. Just one second. Come and sit there. Come. Keep quiet, please. This was a groundbreaking document. Careful there, my baby. Sit over there. Groundbreaking. Come, you can sit over here. Groundbreaking. Sorry about that. A groundbreaking study. And what they essentially, just putting in a nutshell, they believe that, which has been irrefutable, it's been argued on so many levels and it's been proved correct, fortunately for them, was that there was a mitochondrial Eve. They didn't actually term it as mitochondrial Eve. This was the press, the media, that dubbed the woman mitochondrial Eve. And mitochondrial Eve was an African woman and lived 200,000 years ago in Africa. There were two things they did. One, they took 147 women, drawn generally, in their opinion, this was in America, from 5 geographic populations, and they withdrew fluid from the placentas of all these pregnant women, 147 women. And the funny thing is, the funny thing about this is, they used 20 Africans. 19 were African Americans. 34 were Asians from all over. 21 were Aborigines from Australia. 26 were from New Guinea. 46 white people. Now, if you look at the overwhelming majority of any singular group, the overwhelming majority were white people. 46. 20 Africans. 18 were from Africa. 18 were African Americans. Only 2 from Africa. One from Guinea. Guinea-Bissau. Sorry, both of them were from Guinea-Bissau. So really heavily skewed towards finding out who were the first human beings. But in any event, so they came to the conclusion that indeed they had this one African woman, which the press dubbed mitochondrial Eve. But the problem that they had was, bearing in mind that these people were sitting in a lab in California. And their thinking was, and the reason why they gave the super haplogroup the mitochondrial DNA of this mitochondrial Eve, L, and the reason was L. I'll just show you a picture. Here you go. This was mitochondrial Eve up there. So just quietly, please. And this was, and the reason why they named it L was that 10 or 13 years before that, I'm just busy, please, or 13 years before that, a Swedish anthropologist was digging up the whole of Ethiopia for many years, and in Afar, his name is Donald Johansson, and in Afar, Ethiopia, November the 27th in 1974, they discovered what we know today as Australopithecus afarensis. This was a 4-foot something hominid, knuckle dragging little monkey, who lived 4 million years ago. And because Johansen was fixated on the song Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, the Beatles song, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, they named this hominid Lucy. Now we know that Lucy begins with an L. And this is where the L symbol of Stone King, McCann, and Wilson. Please don't do that, Tunde. Look what you're doing here, darling. If you're going to be naughty, you're going to go out. Okay. This is the genesis of the L. That is why mitochondrial Eve was referred to as L. This is where the L comes from. But here's the problem. Now, if I were to ask you, if we look in South Africa, we take South Africa as an example, and we ask, where are Xhosa people from? The group Xhosa people. And you would say the group of Xhosa people are from the Eastern Cape. You wouldn't therefore, in other words, the density, the distributive density, in other words, where the density of Xhosa people are domiciled is in the Eastern Cape. Yes, of course, there's Xhosa people in the Western Cape. There's Xhosa people all over the show in Gauteng, in Joburg, etc., etc. But predominantly, the vast body mass of Xhosa people are indeed in the Eastern Cape. So what am I arguing with this? What am I arguing is that if this mitochondrial Eve indeed lived or existed around Ethiopia, the predominant genetic distribution and focus would be in Ethiopia. Now, I'm going to show you something. This is, okay, can you see it? There we go. Okay, you can see it, sorry. Now, this is Evia. The two unbroken lines from Eve is here. L0D, where all KhoeSan groups come from. And then L1, which is over here. These are two unbroken lines. The only two unbroken lines out of the seven daughters, the 7 maternal children that mitochondrial Eve have. So these are the only two unbroken lines, which is L0D and L1. So in other words, coming back to my argument, that there should be a heavy preponderance. If you look on a map of Africa, there should be a heavy preponderance of L0D and L1 indeed in Ethiopia. So if we do this, now you can see there's Africa, and this is Ethiopia over here. Now let me show you, here's a trick thing to this. If you look, this is South Africa over here, and this is L0. But now look at Ethiopia again. In fact, the highest distribution of L0 and L0D you would find in Southern Africa. The highest. In other words, there are more L0D, L0 people there. And then L1. Look where L1 is. In West Africa. So now I'll ask you again. Common sense would tell you that if indeed mitochondrial Eve existed in Ethiopia, there would be a huge preponderance, a huge mass distribution of L0 and L0D there. And in fact, the opposite is true. The highest density of L0 we find in Southern Africa. The highest preponderance and distribution, mass distribution we find of L1, this includes all of L1, is found in the Western Africa, predominantly Yoruba people. L0 is predominantly KhoeSan people. In fact, if you were to go to take a genetic swab of all so-called colored people, more than 75% of all so-called colored people are L0D. That is our mitochondrial DNA. 75% of us. And that is a scientific, irrefutable fact. And that comes from both the male and the female genetic lines. In any event, so okay, what's the reason for what we're discussing today? And the reason what we're discussing today is, Tunde, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Okay, you can take it inside. The reason why we're discussing that is because what we want to do is to get to the root of how KhoeSan genetics distributed itself globally. And this is what happened. And I've got this model over here, which you may find very interesting. Have a look at this. If you look at you have all these dark brown kind of spots all over the show. These are KhoeSan rock art sites throughout Africa. And there are thousands of them. They're all over the world. But I'm just speaking about Africa right now. And if you look at this, but look carefully, and I'll show you. This is Ethiopia over here. Ethiopia, in fact, has the least density in terms of rock art sites. Now, I ask you again, if original people and the oldest people we know engaged in rock art, as is found all over the world, particularly in the south of Africa, why is there so little in Ethiopia? I'm going to show you this map again. There you go, exactly the same map. You find predominance in the south of L0, which is a direct line to mitochondrial Eve, and the green over here, which is a direct line L1 to mitochondrial Eve. Yet in Ethiopia, you find the smallest amount, the smallest density. So, I'm going to bring you back to this picture of rock art sites. This is very interesting. Now, you'll find the majority, thousands upon thousands of sites, are found in southern Africa, South Africa in particular, Zimbabwe, and in Namibia. But then all of a sudden, and if you notice, it follows the coastal lines and riverways or waterways. You'll see there, that is all, this is on Lake Malawi. This is all by Lake, you look just along waterways and along the coast. Now you're going to ask, what in heaven's name is these two? These are two massive settlements here in Algeria. This goes through a number of countries, and you've got 5 or 6 countries that this one goes through. This is a very interesting one. I'll come back to this one now, but this is a very interesting one. I'm going to show you that picture again. See this? 100,000 years ago, there was a huge lake in the center of what was known as the Sahara today. Show you again. Corresponds with that. There were in fact 3 major rivers coming from the Mediterranean. 3 major rivers flowing from the Mediterranean into the site. And people lived here. This was KhoeSan people, because we know of the rock art there, depicted them as KhoeSan people, but keenly so. They existed there for 100,000 years. And this is a very interesting area here, because this area, you'll find these kind of pictures, these kind of rock art here. This is all from that entire area. And you will see that picture there is a wheel. In other words, KhoeSan people, and I'll come to how we got there, but KhoeSan people in this area up here, which I just showed you now, actually invented a wheel more than 12,500 years ago. Now, why do I say more than 12,500 years ago? It's very simple. How we can say it was more than 12,500 years ago? Because for the simple reason that 12,500 years ago is when the Sahara started becoming a desert. Yet, European historians will tell us, no, they found a wheel in Slovakia and it's 5,000 years old. But hey, we already invented a wheel in Africa. And this was KhoeSan people of KhoeSan genetics more than 12,500 years ago. More than 12,500 years ago. So, how did we get there? I'm going to explain to you how we got there. This is my model which I developed, and this is L0. This is the birth of that first group of people, which, according to, I'm going to read this for you. This is a group, a huge group, who's been studying all sorts of caves in South Africa, from Stilbaai Blombos Cave, Sterkfontein Caves. They've now narrowed it down to. Pinnacle Point Caves in Mossel Bay, the Pinnacle Point Cave system in Mossel Bay. And this professor, Alan G. Morris, has headed the entire, my apologies, Professor Curtis Mayron from the Institute of Human Origins in Arizona State University, together with UCT, Australian University, Israeli, French. You got half of the world there studying Sterkfontein Cave, Die Walle, Hoekse Baai, Grijsbaai, Obaai, Blauwbaai, Vleesebank, Rassepunt, Cape Agulhas, and Pinnacle Cave Point. And they agree irrefutably that the first group of modern human beings originated in southwestern Cape, and that was our. Now, what this picture does is my model of how human beings migrated throughout Africa. You will see the red arrows is the migration. The red arrows follows waterways, follows the sea coast. And my argument of L0 and L0D and L1B. I'll take you back to this little picture here again. If you remember this picture, these are the two oldest unbroken lines. Now, L3, which is this one, is a very interesting line, because all human beings outside of Africa originate from this one group of people. I will discuss this a bit later. But let's just deal with these two. L0D and L1. And if you look at my map, you will see that L0D and L1 moved all the way up the west coast. Let's look at the west coast of Africa first. If you go to Namibia, tell me the two major tribes in Namibia. Where are those people where are those KhoeSan groups that disbelieve me? They always say, no, KhoeSan people were here first. I say no. And I've proven this. I can prove this categorically and scientifically now. L0D, if you go to Namibia, our first neighbors. There are two groups in Namibia. Herero, who are dark-skinned Africans, and Namakwa, who are brown-skinned people. They are KhoeSan and L1B. If you go to Angola, you got exactly the same argument. You go further up into Cameroon and Congo Brazzaville, you got exactly the same situation. This red thing here is a Yoruba settlement. This is where L1B, this is Yoruba. The Yoruba settlement, there was a huge Yoruba settlement here. And I'll just show you another picture. It's very interesting. Now, here's something really cool. 50,000 years ago, 50,000 years, a group of L0D, which is KhoeSan people, L1B, which is Yoruba, dark-skinned people, jointly 50,000 years ago, sailed all the way to Brazil. And you know what they did in Brazil? They set up a colony in Brazil. And this colony, they lived there, they occupied it for 50,000 consecutive years. 50,000 consecutive years. They were by far the first people to live in South America, long before anybody else. And this area, and I'll just put this in here quickly. You can find this here. I've just put it in there. Underneath this. Okay, you can see there now. It's a YouTube link. Now, you will see the first Americans were black Aborigines. That's a very cool statement. If you go and watch this video, it will show you that 50,000 years ago, people sailed by boat. They actually got the picture. Look, here's the picture. I'm going to show you the picture now. Oh my godly. Okay, sorry, I've got the picture somewhere else. But if you go and look there, you will actually see there's a picture. There's a picture of a guy sitting under a painting of a boat. Cave paintings, rock paintings of this guy's sailing on a boat 50,000 years ago from West Africa. How do we know they came from West Africa? Two reasons. They came from Africa, of course, but two reasons. Because when they did DNA analysis on the skeletons, and the skeletons came from 50,000, 40,000, went down 10,000 years. They got 5 groups of 10,000 year apart skeletons. And all the skeletons returned with two mitochondrial DNA. One was L0D, one was L1B. No coincidence there. So KhoeSan and Yoruba. What is known as KhoeSan and Yoruba today. So please, if you want to, you can go and get this. So here we had KhoeSan people. I'm gonna show you this again. So we had a Yoruba settlement here, and of course KhoeSan people were still moving up, and we had a huge KhoeSan settlement here 100,000 years ago. How do you know this? 100,000 years ago there was a settlement there. They've got beads and cave paintings, etc., there 100,000 years ago. How do we know they left that area? Because it became a desert. And if you look at the west coast migration, you will see they moved with the water. As the desert was drying from this side, the desert dried from the Atlantic Ocean. They were moving east all the way to, you guessed it, Egypt. However, there was a group of people who crossed over here into Gibraltar. And from Gibraltar, they went into the Iberian Peninsula. This was KhoeSan people. And went into from there, they went to France, up to all the way up to Finland and Norway. And you can see the petroglyphs, cave paintings there. Again, same boats that they used to sail all the way across to Sierra de Capivara in Brazil 50,000 years ago. The Vikings, the original Vikings were black. Eric the Black, original Vikings, all black people. I spoke the last time about St. Patrick's killing all the KhoeSan people in Ireland. Grimaldi men were found in Italy, and they were 45,000 years old. And the genetic tests on the skeletons prove them to be L0D. So, coming back to this. So, we got a group of people that moved, black and dark skin and light skinned people, moved up here. A Yoruba settlement there, moved up here, huge, for the 100,000 consecutive years, there was a settlement here, KhoeSan settlement. They then moved and settled in a lush new area called Egypt. By the way, the Nile River, as we know today, never ever opened up into the Mediterranean. The Nile River flowed down what is referred, this was 100,000 years ago, flowed down what is known as the Benue Trough and emptied out in Nigeria, Cameroon. So the Nile River, as we know today, never ever emptied out there, but actually fed all the way down the Benue Trough and came out of the Niger Delta here in Nigeria. This is where Yoruba people migrated along there. And then KhoeSan people migrated along here. And then we had the East Cape, the Eastern Coast migration. How do we know about, we got the East Coast migration? And that is where L3. So remember there were 3 groups. L0D, L1B, and L3. L3 populated the whole of the world. They went all along the coast, straight into the Arabian Peninsula 100 to 115,000 years ago. Although science says it was 65,000 years ago. They know it's a lie because they found bodies in Israel and Palestine of 100,000 years old. So obviously Africans went there long before that. However, a group of Africans went inland into the center, into the Congo. How do we know they went into the Congo? We found the Lumumba bone and the Ishango bone. I can show that to you at a later stage. And then all of these groups converged in Egypt 10,000 years ago. Egypt, Sudan. How do we know that? Haven't I given evidence? And if you go through my lectures, you go through all of my notes, you will see we've given evidence that a group called DNA Tribes have done genetic tests on the three most famous Egyptian pharaohs. Amenhotep III, Tutmosis III, as well, Amenhotep III, and then King Tutankhamun, which you know as King Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun is predominantly KhoeSan. Predominantly KhoeSan. So he is composed of three groups of genetics. KhoeSan predominantly, and then East African, which is Al3, and then Yoruba, Al1. Amunhotep the third, the God King, he is predominantly KhoeSan and Yoruba. The middle king, which was Amenhotep, him again, predominantly L3, predominantly L0D. So my model, my migration model, which I showed here, actually stands up to scrutiny. Completely stands up to scrutiny. It makes perfect sense. And I did this before I started linking all of these other dots together. So now we have a bunch of Africans moving out of South Africa over a period of 200,000 years. As the families grew, as there was pressure on the environment, and we know there were millions and millions, tens upon tens of millions of Africans living in South Africa. How do we know this? Anywhere between 150 to 200,000 years ago, in Mpumalanga alone, there are thousands and thousands of rock surface sites where millions of people live throughout the whole of Mpumalanga, all the way down to Bloemfontein. We have got fish traps all the way from Mossel Bay, right down the coast, Cape Town, all the way up to Namibia, and these fish traps are tens of thousands of years old, very ancient stuff. So what you had was pressure on the environment, pressure on the natural resources, and of course families were growing and growing and growing. And as families grew into the tens of millions, they obviously start to migrate, which is human nature. I mean, it just stands to reason. So people migrated. So now we know that people migrated into Europe. People migrated 50,000 years ago into those that migrated into Europe. Sorry, was 45,000 years ago. Those that migrated into South America was 50,000 years ago. And then by that time, Africa was densely populated. However, then you have L3. So what happened with L3? And this is what happened with L3. L3, you see them over here, crossed over into the Arabian Peninsula from the area of Egypt, crossed over into the Arabian Peninsula and walked all the way down the Arabian Peninsula, which was, this was 110,000, 115,000 years ago, 115. They populated two areas. One area was what we know as the Middle East today. Another area was India. And India, I mean, there's so much evidence other than there being L3, which is the root of all of these the tribes you find. India has got the biggest majority of dark-skinned people on earth. A lot of people say, well, black people are the biggest area and distribution you find, or country that's got the most black people on earth is Nigeria. That's untrue. The country with the most black people on earth is to be found nowhere else but in India. And these are the people who are the progeny of Dravidians. And Dravidians we know, one second please. Dravidians we know, close the door please, Tunde. Close the door. The Dravidians originated out of Ethiopia. And they are L3. Dravidians, I'll give you an example. Ganges, the river Ganges, is not named after any Indian person. Ganges was a general in the Ethiopian army many thousands and thousands of years ago. So you have a lot of African influence, KhoeSan influence to the degree that if you go to Cambodia, if you go to Vietnam, if you go to China, Malaysia, genetically speaking, and this many universities did a huge field study across Asia, from China all the way across to Cambodia and Thailand, and proved that the base genetics, the base mitochondrial DNA of all their ancestors was KhoeSan people. So here you had KhoeSan people predominantly spreading through Asia, from Middle East all the way through to China. And then at the same token, you had dark-skinned African people, lighter-skinned Khoe-San people moving into Polynesia, into the Pacific Islands. If you go to the Pacific Islands, you'll see one group is dark-skinned, one group, do yourself a favor and go and do that. One group is brown-skinned. You can go from Papua New Guinea, where it's incredibly dark-skinned people. You can go right next door and you can find Samoans who are brown-skinned people. You can go to Australia and you'll find dark-skinned Aborigines. You'll go to their neighbors, Maori. The Maori are light brown-skinned people. How much more times do we have to prove, do I have to prove my scientific position that dark-skinned brown people and light-skinned brown people originated from the same maternal mother in the same area at the same time? And this idea of dark-skinned black people and brown-skinned black people only mirrors, from a macro point of view, mirrors science on a micro point of view. What I mean by that? Anybody who understands scientific melanin, from neuromelanin, that a human's brain cannot operate without neuromelanin. However, people would like to believe that melanin is black. No, melanin is composed of two elements, one brown element and one black element. A dark hole, dark matter, is constituted by brown matter and black matter. Now, I hope that settles that. However, just lastly, we also know that during the slave trade, we had many Africans that were carried from West Africa all the way through to both to Canada and to the West Indies, of course, South America, and to North America. Even within that, here's a very interesting, and I'm going to post this in this chat now. The same group, DNA Tribes, who did my genetic study, my genome test many years ago, and returned with me being 83% L0D. I've just posted that there now. Did a test called 50 black Canadians. They took 50 black Canadians, and of the 50, they just took them randomly because they knew, of course, they came from West Indies, they came from Africa, they came from they came from America, they came from Brazil even. In fact, some of them were from Brazil, some came from Africa. But the funniest thing is, the overwhelming majority of these randomly chosen black people in Brazil, randomly chosen, returned with a predominance of KhoeSan genetics, as well as West African Yoruba genetics. Very interesting. So here you find this playing itself out on a global level. So for all of those of you that's interested, and this essentially is going to make up the basis of my forthcoming movie, my documentary, which is entitled KhoeSan, the story of us all. So I hope those of you enjoyed what I was sharing with you today. I hope that it resolves some outstanding issues that people can't understand what the situation is. Of course, we know that there are many tons of information that's still hidden in universities like the Western Cape, universities like Wits. They're hidden there. I'm telling you now. One day people are going to find out, and there's going to be hell to pay. I hope there's going to be hell to pay that these anthropologists, these genetic scientists are hiding a lot of information. So for all of you that have watched, I really appreciate it. Have a fantastic rest of the afternoon, and have an illuminated evening. Thank you so much, and goodbye.